Hey everybody, this is Andres from Board Gamify, and today I'm back to talk about my top 10 anticipated games for 2022. So as we know, there's hundreds of games that get released each year. So these are the 10 that I know of at this point, when this video is going out. On top of that, a lot of these are Kickstarters, so I have to hope that they're going to get in this year with the pandemic and shipping issues we have. But I think for the most part, the ones that I've chose should get in this year. So let's go ahead and dive into that list. My number 10 is a game that was co-designed by Richard Garfield, which many of you may know as the designer of Magic the Gathering, and that is Mindbug. Mindbug is a two-player head-to-head card game where players will take a deck of cards. I believe it's around 36 cards. They'll deal 10 to each player, and then each player starts with 5 cards in their hand. So you'll have 5 cards in your hand, 5 cards in your deck, and you're only allowed to do one of two things on your turn. And that's either play a creature from your hand or attack with a creature that you have in play. Each player has 3 life points, and the goal of the game is to get your opponent down to 0 life points. But the really interesting thing about this game is each player starts with 2 Mindbug cards. And what those Mindbug cards do is anytime your opponent plays a card, you can exhaust one of your Mindbug cards to take that card and play it as if it came from your hand. So it leads to this really interesting mind tug of war between each player, where you're constantly having to ask yourself, are they playing that because they want me to mind bug it, because they have a better card in their hand, or are they playing it hoping I'm not going to mind bug it? So it takes this really simple game, and with just this minor twist of the mind bug cards, turns it into this really interesting decision space. The game is on Tabletop Simulator, and I believe the people who kickstarted it got a print and play version. So there are ways to play it now, so I definitely recommend checking it out. It only takes about 15-20 minutes per game, so it's a nice filler game with really good decisions. So that's my number 10, Mindbug. Moving on to number 9 is a second version of a game that already exists that takes MOBAs and brings them to the tabletop. And that is Guards of Atlantis 2. So I never got to play Guards of Atlantis, but I am a big fan of the MOBA genre in video games. So games like League of Legends, Heroes of the Storm, Dota, but this game manages to take that and bring it to the tabletop. So the map is 3 lanes, just like in the video games. Each player is going to be playing a hero. Minions will be spawning in each lane. You'll be pushing those lanes with the whole objective of getting to your opponent's base before they can get to yours. So the only reason this game is a bit lower on my list is because it is a really big, heavy game, and it is 4 to 6 players, so there's that player commitment on top of that. So it's not a game I see myself playing a ton throughout the year, but it's definitely one that I definitely want to check out and get at least a few plays in. As well, because of the mechanics. There's a mechanism in the game to where as you play through the game, your character might level up. And when you level up, you get a choice of upgrades. And obviously whatever upgrade you choose is the upgrade you get, but the ones you don't choose will also affect your stats, which adds another interesting decision for the player, to where you're not only picking what you want, but you need to pick so that the ones that you don't get affect your stats in the way you want. So that's my number 9. Guards of Atlantis 2. Moving on to number 8 is a game that did get a lot of attention last year. You've probably seen a playthrough of it at this point. The publishers advertised it quite a bit, and that's Mythic Mischief. So Mythic Mischief is a 2 or 4 player game, the 4 player being 2v2, where you're essentially trying to move your characters around a map, avoiding what's called the Tomb Keeper, and trying to get the Tomb Keeper to catch your opponents. So the theme of the game is you're essentially students in a high school trying to avoid the Tomb Keeper, which I guess is like the hall monitor. And each set of characters is their own unique faction. So there's things like zombies, witches, ghosts, and each of those is going to have their own unique abilities and powers that will eventually accomplish the same thing, but in different ways. So they may be moving walls, they may be moving the Tomb Keeper, moving opponents, moving yourself. So it's really more of an abstract game with this nice theme laid on top of it. And it's abstract in the sense that it's almost perfect information. There's very little randomness outside of like the setup when you're setting up the map and the walls. So a lot of the decisions you make are just based off of the information that's present. So yeah, really interesting game that I'm looking forward to checking out. And that is my number 8, Mythic Mischief. Moving on to number 7 is a game that's been in the works for quite some time now. I think I first heard about it in 2019, so we're going on 3 years, almost 3 years now. And that is a social deduction game very similar to Werewolf, and that is Blood on the Clock Tower. So Blood on the Clock Tower, like I mentioned, is a social deduction game where you're trying to figure out who the demon is, and each other player is going to receive their own unique role that will have their own abilities or powers. But it's really Werewolf kind of cranked up tenfold. All of the unique abilities and powers are very impactful in the game. They also change the way the game plays out. So for example, one of the characters is the lunatic. The lunatic thinks that they're the demon, but they're actually not. They're on the good player's side. So even though you get information as you progress through the game, you have to take into account what other players could be represented in the game, because it could be false information. So it does make it for a lengthier game. I think some of these can go up to between an hour and 2 hours. So definitely a heavier game. It's one that I like to think of as more of a like a murder mystery replacement. It's definitely an event that you plan for in the night, because one player also has to play as the moderator, which essentially runs the game, makes sure characters get to use their abilities in between rounds, gives people information. But that's something that I don't really mind. I'm the type of player that likes to play those roles, the moderator roles. So yeah, one that I'm really looking forward to and really hope gets shipped out this year. That's my number 7, Blood on the Clock Tower. Number 6 is an existing game that just had a really popular IP slapped on it, and that is Marvel Dice Thrones. So Dice Thrones is a game that's been around for a while. We've had Season 1, we've had Season 2, but I just never really gave it a shot. The dice chucking aspect of it never really called to me. But I just recently got a chance to play it, and I really enjoyed it. There definitely is that luck aspect of it. You're definitely chucking dice, but each character has their own unique deck of cards that will allow you to mitigate those dice rolls, as well as your opponent's dice rolls. So there's definitely some strategy to it. And it's just fun. The games play really quick. There's a lot of variety. You can always play different characters. The different characters play differently amongst each other. So once I found out there's going to be a Marvel version of it, it was kind of a no-brainer. I'm a really big Marvel fan. I read the comics growing up. I still try and keep up with them as much as I can today. So yeah, that was one I definitely went all in on the Kickstarter, and looking forward to getting in this year. So that's my number 6, Marvel Dice Throne. Moving on to number 5 is from a pretty well-established designer, Stan Kordonski, and that is Resurgence. Resurgence is one that the theme didn't really call to me. It's a post-apocalyptic theme where you're trying to gather resources to build out your base and survive the apocalypse. But what really drew me to it, and it's kind of a hallmark of Stan Kordonski at this point, is he blends a lot of mechanisms that you don't usually see together, and Resurgence is no exception to that. It has hidden worker placement, it has bag building, it has tableau building where you're trying to build out your camp. So essentially what you do every game is you'll have a bag of workers, you'll pull them out, you'll secretly place them behind a screen, you'll reveal those, and based on where you place them, you'll get to move up on an influence track against the other players. You'll then place your workers, you can upgrade your base, and as you do that, you'll reveal private locations where you can place workers on a future turn. So just all of these things and how seamlessly they melded together, got me really excited for this game. So that is my number 5, Resurgence. Moving on to number 4 is by Tom Lehman, which is the designer of Res Arcana and Race for the Galaxy, 2 games that I hold in really high regard, and that is Dice Realms. Dice Realms is a dice building game where you're literally building a dice. You can pop off and remove the faces as you upgrade it throughout the game. But what really called to me is this game. There's no main board, there's no player board, you just have your dice. But it managed to make it still feel like your typical Euro type game. You're gaining excuse me, you're gaining resources, you're gaining currency to upgrade your die faces. You're having to pay upkeep for your workers, which are essentially your dice. And all of the players play simultaneously as they roll their dice every round. And the really interesting thing is each game, there's a set of die faces that you'll always have available. But there's also other die faces that will be interchangeable every game, depending on the cards you draw during setup. So there's hundreds of die faces, and which makes for thousands upon thousands of different combinations that you could potentially put together on your die. So yeah, really excited about that one. It is a pretty big production just because the amount of die faces they have to include, and they made like custom inserts for the box to hold all of these die faces, so you don't have to worry about putting all these in separate little baggies. So it does come at a higher price point. But definitely one that I'm looking forward to. That's my number 4, Dice Realms. So moving on to number 3 is a polyomino drafting game where you're trying to build out your own planet, and that is Planet Unknown. So it's very similar in the polyomino aspect, which if you don't know are just essentially like these puzzle Tetris type pieces that you're drafting. So it's similar to Patchwork, Isle of Cats, where you're taking those pieces, putting them on your board to fill it out as much as possible to build your planet. But what really is drawing me to this game is the way those tiles are drafted. So there's a Lazy Susan circle where the polyomino pieces are placed, and that circle is divvied up like a pie. So each slice of the pie will have different polyomino pieces in it. And on a player's turn, they're going to rotate that until the section in front of them is where they want to draft their piece from. Then every other player will take a piece for the section that's in front of them. So each turn, everybody's getting to do something. The game continues at a really good clip, and that drafting system just really intrigued me. Obviously, like I mentioned, it's reminiscent of Patchwork, Isle of Cats, but it's also got that rondel style like Kadara, where one player is rotating the disc in the center, and then everybody's drafting a card based off of what ended up in front of them. So yeah, that one's got me really interested, looking forward to that one, and that's my number 3, Planet Unknown. Moving on to number 2 is a one versus all hidden movement game, and if you happen to watch my top 10 games of 2021, you'll know that that is one of my favorite genres, and that is Beast. Beast is a game where one player will play as one of several Beast factions, and everyone else will play as the Hunters. Each of the Hunters is also a unique faction. So it's a typical hidden movement game where the Beast is moving around the map secretly, and the Hunters are attempting to track them down and get to them before they complete their objective. But it adds a lot more layers to that. So the Hunters have their own unique abilities, their own unique cards. They're getting to complete missions in between rounds. They can purchase upgrades and items. The Beast is also moving around the map, defeating animals to gain grudge tokens to unlock better abilities and complete their own objectives. And on top of that, what's really drawing me to this game is the drafting at the beginning of the round. So at the beginning of each round, all of the players, including the Beast, will draft from the set of cards. So when you're doing that, and that's going to essentially determine the actions you have available to you in that round. So as you're drafting, you're having to decide, not only what cards do you want, but what cards do you want to keep from the Beast, and what cards do you want passed to the other Hunters so they have those actions available to them. So that leads to really interesting rounds, round after round. And the game also makes it so that you don't technically have to do any writing. So the Beast is going to have a deck of cards that have a direction printed on each of them, and they'll play one of those face down on the board, which is essentially their hidden movement. Now, I do believe later on in the campaign they included a screen with something that you could draw on for people who are worried that they wouldn't remember what cards they placed or forget where they were on the map. But I thought it was neat that you technically don't have to write in this game. You could just base it off of the cards you've played. So that's my number 2, Beast. Moving on to number 1, it's actually by a designer who I've already mentioned another game on his list, and Stan Kordonsky, and that game is Endless Winter, Paleo-Americans. So Endless Winter is getting compared a lot to games like Lost Ruins of Arnak, Dune Imperium, because it is a worker placement deck building game. But unlike those, I think most people at this point have heard one of the flaws with Lost Ruins of Arnak is that research track. Once somebody starts advancing really high on that, you almost feel like you have to do that as well, because you get so many points by doing that, that if you don't do it too, they're just going to run away with the game. Endless Winter, does not have that at all. There's so many different ways to gain points. You can upgrade your board to get points. You can do a set collection game with the animals. There's an area control where you can expand your camp on a separate board. There you can place monoliths, which are essentially these tokens you're placing on another board that will give you points depending on the configuration that is there. And all of these are viable. Every time I've played this, by the way, the game is on Tabletop Simulator if you want to check it out, which is why I've been able to play it. But every time I've played this, all of those routes seem viable. So just because one person is going really heavy on the set collection with the animals, I've never felt the need like, oh, I've got to do that too now, because there's so many other avenues for you to take that you always feel like you're competing point-wise. There's also different types of workers. You have your normal workers, and you also have your leader. And depending on where you place your leader on the board, you may get bonuses. All of the cards that you're building your deck with are multi-purpose. You can use them to increase the effectiveness of the spot that you place your worker on. You can play them for their abilities. You can wait until the night phase and play them for that ability. So the game just has so many options, and everything just blends in so well, especially within the theme too, that it just shot up to my number 1. This is definitely one that I went all in on the Kickstarter and really hoping that it gets in this year. So that is my number 1, Endless Winter. So let me know what you guys think down below in the comments, what your top 10 were, if there were anything that I missed, or that you have different on your list, or if you agree with any of mine. If you liked this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more content like this, please subscribe to the channel. I'll talk to you guys next time.